Okay, so we're going to be talking about how to add supportive structure to Brightspace. And what I'd encourage you to do is open up Brightspace because it's probably easiest with some of the things we'll be talking about just to experiment. You can create a new module or take one of your core shells from the spring or take one of your old core shells so you won't do any damage if you've already replicated it. But log into that. I think that's going to be helpful. And first, there we go. You can get a copy of the slides, and I'll also put that in chat because there may be some useful information there. And let me see. Okay, and that'll again give you the option of putting the slides in your Google Drive, and that way you'll have access to it. You can edit it, modify it, put any notes you want in it, or anything else that you find useful. Okay. So first, what is meant by structure? This is something that we talk about all the time in these workshops, but anyone have any thoughts on what structure represents? Either open your mic or type something into chat.
I mean, it feels just sort of like, I mean, I could be totally wrong about this, but setting up the modules in a way that allows students to navigate quickly and easily through the material that you want them to see. So I kind of think of it as a way of organizing, and I'm not particularly good at that. So that's part of what I'm here.
Yeah, a lot of that is a good part of it, just the organizational structure. Um, I remember one time in a workshop, someone suggests that what they do at the beginning of the class is they do some sort of a search in their course so that students can find various things that are buried or hidden. And if you have to go through some sort of search to find things that are buried or hidden in your course, it's probably not very structured. So yeah, it's partly making the navigation simple and so that it's easy for students to find things so that they're able to focus their cognitive efforts on learning the material and not on trying to figure out where things are. If you're having to do a scavenger hunt in your class for students to find things, you may want to think about maybe changing the structure a little bit to make it more transparent and easier for students to navigate. So yeah, that's a big part of it. So anything else though?
Well, I'll
Any?
just add to me, I'm a very type A person. I acknowledge that. So to me, it just means putting things together in a way so that they make coherent sense. So in other words, like, one like I don't even know how to explain it. So, but so that things follow in a logical order, so things are grouped together, almost kind of like an outline would be on a paper or in a syllabus, or just like just so that things are ordered in a coherent, logical way.
Mhm.
That's what it means
That
to me.
right, and that includes having making it easier to find things. But it's also in terms of the instructions you give students, make them clear and transparent. We talked about in workshop yesterday, transparency in learning and teaching, and that's part of structure. But basically, structure is giving students support to be successful in general, and all these things fit into that, I think, right? And there's a lot of research out there that suggests that when you provide students with more structure, it tends to benefit everyone, but it disproportionately benefits those students who tend to be left behind. So making clear instructions, making it easy to find things, making it obvious what you want students to be doing and how they're going to be evaluated, all those things add structure to the course. Again, allow students to focus more on what they're learning. There's other things you can do as part of that. Sometimes people will share notes with students and so on, or share skeletal outlines if there's some sort of a video or if there's a class presentation. But in general, it's just making it easier for students to organize things, to make sense of the concepts and so forth. It's easy for us to skip over things that we just assume students will know. But they don't. We've had a lot more practice with this. So structure is kind of all those things. And we're just going to talk about some of the features in Brightspace. Well, first we're going to, oops, I didn't mean to jump out of there. Let's try that again. Let me maximize that. So what the research shows is that the more structure you have in your course in general, and I did it again, the more structure you have, the better off students tend to be. A few of the studies here in biology, statistics, and math have shown significant learning gains resulting from providing more structure in the course. And again, if you want to look at more detail on what the evidence shows, these all work. But again, I think each of these show that the results are strongest for students who are first gen students who don't have as much preparation for college, in the sense that they don't have siblings or parents or others or friends who've also gone through the college experience, and who might be experiencing some imposter syndrome if they're the first in the family to go to college, etc. And a really good resource on this is Inclusive Teaching, a book by Vijay Sathi and Kelly Hogan, which we had as a reading group book a few years, well, 3 or 4 years, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now. And it's an excellent source primarily on ways of building more structure into your courses and on the research. But if you just want to look at some shorter studies of this, more formal studies, those are pretty good ones as starting points. Okay, so partly it's to reveal the hidden curriculum, making it clear what your expectations are. And again, you can use rubrics and multiple examples for that. And again, that's part of that transparency in learning and teaching that we talked about in an earlier workshop. It's mostly just giving the students the resources they need to be successful when they need it. Just giving them a lot of resources without organizing them in a useful way is not as helpful. And also part of this is letting them know that you care about their success and that you're there to help them and so forth. That's not really just structure, but it does, by adding more structure, it's telling students that you are there to try to support them in their learning. Okay, so, and I keep clicking on the links. Let me try this again. Oh, and some of the research on this was Wise Feedback by David Yeager and others. And what wise feedback is when you give students feedback, an earlier thing that many people have done was use a sandwich approach, where if they're giving students feedback on what they can do better, they'd start off by saying something positive, then they'd give them constructive feedback, and they'd end on a positive note. It turns out that that has virtually no impact on student learning or motivation. What wise feedback does is it's an approach where instead of providing students with that sort of sandwich of feedback, which students often got from so many courses, they kind of recognized it as the only thing they were really getting was that critique in the middle. What wise feedback does is it provides feedback along with a suggestion that what happened, that they're receiving this feedback because the instructor has high standards, high expectations of their ability, and believes that they're capable of doing it. And we can build that in using some of the features in Brightspace. Other studies have found that supportive target messages, supportive messages going to students, encouraging them, reminding them that everyone struggles when they're first learning new concepts. That's part of the learning process. And also perhaps some growth mindset messaging. Each of those studies does a really nice, each of them is a very well-designed study, which provides fairly compelling evidence that that sort of support can be helpful for students. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, and we'll go through some examples of this, are checklists. And what checklists do is just provide a list to students of the things that they need to accomplish in any given course module, and it lets them check them off once they've completed them. Another thing we're going to talk about is using accordion files to simplify navigation, to make it easier to organize things, and to make the navigation structure more transparent and just less clunky. Bundling things together that are related, and again, making it easy for students to find where things are. And then one of the most powerful things is the use of intelligent agents to remind students of approaching due dates or to provide growth mindset messaging when students are struggling and to share relevant support resources and remind them of that you are there to help them and to provide these resources to help them be successful. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about. But what we're going to do now is we're going to hop over to Brightspace. And let's see. I've got that on the other screen here. I thought I had that on the other screen. One second. Here we go. Okay, so I'm just going to show some examples of these first, and then we'll talk about how to build them. Okay, I'm going to go to one of my fall classes. Let's see, fall 2025. There we go. Okay, now let's first look a little bit at a typical course module in terms of structure, in terms of at least what it looks like when we do some of these things. Well, I had them in reverse order, so the one at the top is always the most recent one. I had 13 modules in here. And what happens is students here first see an overview of the module. The structure is pretty much the same in every one of the course modules. They first see an overview, and the overview provides them with information on, and here we do have this sort of structure here. Okay, and see, each one of the course modules have this, and they get used to seeing it. These are the things they have to do. It's an overview of what they're going to be looking at. It tells them what their learning objectives are for the week, and then the tasks for the week. And then the next thing after that is the checklist. And what the checklist does is it provides a list of everything that's due and when it's due and so forth. And it also puts in direct links to the things that are due. So it's just a way of reminding them what needs to be done. And again, they can go in and check things off when it's all done. And let's talk about each of these. I'm just going to create first in terms of structure here. I'm just going to create a brand new page. I'm going to jump to, well, I can do it right in this module, I suppose. I'm just going to create a web page. Create a web page. And before putting anything in it, I'm going to use a document template, and I'm going to use accordions. And now what happens is it will automatically generate a template for you with a variety of accordion components. They could be a single one, a group of two, group of three. Let's say we're going to use a group of three. What you can do is just edit out the rest of this and just leave the group of three, and we can go below that too. And you probably want to get rid of that image, which is popping up everywhere. Students get kind of sick of seeing it. And you can create your own and so forth if you'd like. We're just in any case, this is what an accordion looks like. So basically, you have accordions that I think are up to 5 or 6. And if you want to do more than that, you can always put 2 of them. If you want, let's say 8, you could put 2 4-1s together, or you could go in and edit the HTML and just duplicate the code and renumber them a little bit with the titles. And once you've done this, all you need to do is put in a title. So let's say this is the first group. Let's say these are video support, let's say. And these might be tutorial modules. Or well, let's say these are YouTube videos, for example, that you found relevant to the module, and you probably want to spell it correctly, sorry. And then something else down here. Let's say these are quizzes even, or formative assessments, let's say. However you want to group it, pick whatever. Let me try that again. the titles are separated here. And so this, let's say, would be formative assessments. And, if there was another one, you could go in and add summative assessments, whatever. But it's just a nice way of compactly grouping all the things students need to do. You type in whatever you want here. And again, you've got all the usual formatting tools in there, including header structure, to meet accessibility requirements. And let's just say, I'm not going to be very clever with this. I'm just going to say links to videos would go in here. And here we would put in links to tutorials. And I use these pretty regularly in my courses, and so on. And these would be formative assessments. So these could be links to other things that oops, I did that twice. Sorry. There we go. I meant to put it down here. So basically in the gray area, you put the content, and then what will happen when students view it, and this would be, let's say, lists of assessment or practice quizzes, whatever you want to call it. And we will just save and close that. And we do need a title here. And let's just say, remove later, just so I don't forget that. So I'm going to save this, and that will now show up just at the bottom of this list. And so now when students view this page, what will happen, save and close. And now what will happen is when students go into this, they will see this, and it will expand to whatever you put in there, basically. And I didn't mean to copy the content in. But basically, it's just like creating any other pages. It just allows you to group things a little bit more compactly, which makes it easier for students to find things, especially if you use the same structure throughout your course. These are external learning tools. They can't work quite as well in there. These are some video quizzes I put in, quizzes and so forth. But in each module, I also have review videos. And this review video is actually organized as an accordion folder. Sometimes I got two, sometimes I got 4 or 5 different groups. And in each case, if they click it, it gives them some videos that they can, it gives them a list of videos relevant to that topic. That I searched through and found that were relevant for the students' use. So again, instead of having this long, massive list of dozens of videos in some chapters, it just groups them so they can go in and focus on whatever they need to review, and again, pick and choose the videos out of that. Okay, so that's just a convenient way of organizing materials. Now, checklists. Let's to get to checklists. Yeah, Ben.
Yes, thank you for this. How will I insert this picture, the income, what you have in yours? How can
Oh, I use Canva. Basically, what you can do is replace any of those other things. So let me see. If I inspect the image, will that give me the size? Somewhere I looked up the typical sizes of these things, and I just used Canva to create the image. And there, if you have a Canva account, there's a lot of, well, somewhere in there. I don't know. I don't have that many tools on this Mac. But basically, if you know the image size, you can create it in any graphics program and just upload it. And that would be just under, when you edit this, I believe, if you edit, let me see. Editing the title won't do it. Yeah, there it is. If you edit the title, you get this information. And basically what you need is something that fits in that box size. And if you do a search for banner image size for Brightspace, you can get the relative dimensions and then just embed that. I think I have it saved on Canva, but I don't have my Canva stuff on this computer, or at least not the passwords and other things for it. So So basically, you can use any graphics program, or you could go search for images or whatever, and just find something in that sort of shape.
Okay. Thank you.
I think I'm trying to remember the size. I think it was like 400 by 1200. No, I don't remember. These were created a couple of years ago. And then after that, I mostly just have replaced the images by downloading them, editing them, and putting in new ones when I didn't like them so much. Okay, so any questions on creating those little expandable components?
Yeah, John.
Yes.
Um, this is really interesting to see, and I'm very grateful for the explanation of accordion files. I think it could be useful. One of the things I just want to ask about, and maybe we can come back to it if it's going to come up later, but I noticed that you sort of set up your modules conceptually or thematically, and that the chronology is less important. Um, and I like it, but I also wonder if, and this is a general, more bigger question I have about creating lots of structure, is that some of these things are things that I want students to discover, so that if I explicitly frame it, then it's telling them what to look for. So I feel like there's a kind of fine line here. And I don't know if there's any research on, the other side of this, which is what kind of, to what extent do students lose the capacity for agency and initiative if we structure everything so with such high detail?
It varies and it depends partly on the course learning objectives. If part of the course learning objectives are to develop creativity and explore new tools, you may not want to provide it. You want to provide information on what you expect the students to be doing. But this is fairly structured because it's based on a course where there's a really well-defined body of knowledge that we want students to acquire. And in STEM fields, that's often easier in some ways to do because it is a somewhat linear. Now, it is somewhat sequential here because each of the modules is 1 week. And it's also organized in the order in which I want students to do things. First, I want them to think about what the whole module is about. Then it sends them off to work with essentially an interactive textbook. I'm using a Waymaker pack there where they go out and they they first do a pretest, then they read a little bit about a topic, they take some practice quizzes on it and explore it. So it is a very structured path. Other classes will often be less structured in that sense. But the structure that's important really is giving students enough information to be able to be successful in the course so they don't get lost along the way. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you so much.
And just in terms of the structure, first I want them basically to work in the order of this, where they take a look at what they have to do so they know what's expected each week. And then let's go back. And then after that, the study plan is basically the interactive textbook with formative assessments all through it, and then a summary measure at the end. But then I want them to work on parts of this and then do these little videos that I created on the topics where they always get stuck, no matter how well designed the book is, where they watch a video on those things, and then embedded throughout, there's some practice questions for them. And then once they've done that, if they're still not understanding some things, there's these review videos they can use. And then they take a module quiz, which they get a few attempts at. And then periodically, well, every other module, I have an exam that I created with a random mix of questions, and they get a couple of attempts at that and so forth. And I will remove this now just so in case I use the same thing next time. And I don't have students kind of surprised by that. Okay, so but again, there's you want it designed it in a way so that they're able to be successful in your course and not spend a lot of time trying to figure out where to go or what to do. If part of your objectives are for them to explore various tools or various techniques or various genres or whatever, then that would be part of what you'd be describing for them. This is what you should be doing, and maybe some suggestions on how to get started or whatever, or reflection activities or whatever is relevant for your courses, basically. Okay, now, there we go. Okay, so the next thing I want to look at is how to create an intelligent agent. And to do that, you go under course tools to course admin, and that's really where you have the most control over what you're going to do. And we're going to go down to checklist. I'm sorry, we'll do checklist first. And these are ones that I've created, and basically they're pretty straightforward. But let me just show you this is what it looks like from a student's view. So when they log in at the top of each module, these are the things that they have to do. And basically, I broke it up here into complete these things and view these things. You can use whatever categories are appropriate. I remember someone was talking, having categories of read, view, and then complete or assess or something like that. Whatever logical breakdown makes sense. And I use the same structure in, again, each of the course modules. And basically, if they click on it, it takes them right there. And there's a due date for that. And you can either put the due dates in here, or you can put the due dates in on the assignments or the quizzes themselves. You generally don't want to have the due dates twice because they'd show up in their calendars twice. But using due dates either in a checklist or in the modules, I'm sorry, in the actual learning activities themselves is again part of structure because it will populate their calendar and they'll see what things are due when and so forth. So that's really helpful. But now let's just create one. So I'm going to save and close that one. And let's say we want to create a new one. Now, if you already created one, by the way, one of the options is just to copy it and put it in the next and assign it in the next module. And then you can just restructure it for each of the modules with the appropriate links. But let's say we're going to create a new one. Okay. And let's say this is a module, let's say 15 checklist. And you could put a description in it, but you don't really need this. So we're just going to save that. And now the next thing you do is you can start putting things in. The first thing, you don't have to use categories, but it's a nice way of grouping things, perhaps. Has anyone worked with checklists? No?
I've used checklists before. One of
Okay.
the questions while you're setting this up, John, just a quick question that maybe you can answer while you're doing this is when I copy my courses that have a checklist, I notice that I have to go back and make changes. Like you have to actually erase and retype in order for the current date to stick versus the old date. Does that make sense? Because
When you
sometimes when I copied the course and the checklist would copy over, even though I had the due date for the assignment there, I'd have to go back in the checklist because it would show up on the students' calendars with the previous semester due date.
Huh. And did you update the dates by using the update tool in Brightspace?
Well, so I went through the tech support and everything. What it is, because I had the quick links in there with the assignment hyperlinked, so I'd have to go in there and remove everything.
And
But the
redo the
problem
quick
is,
links. Okay.
yeah, the problem is you can't see it. It's invisible, so you're kind of like invisibly deleting something, and then putting in the new link for it to register.
Okay, actually, this was the first time I used the quick links. Before I just listed the activities and then had students check them because they were all in the module. But I put these in. So I haven't had that experience because this is the first time I use quick links within the checklist. And that is a factor to take into account. You can list the things and students will have the links elsewhere in the module. And because, the main purpose of the checklist is for them to just check things off when they complete them. But I found a lot of students were using a checklist as ways of getting to each of the components. It was sort of like a map, which sounds like how students in your class were using it. But what that means is, yeah, you will have to redo the links because they'd be aligned with the old assignments, I guess. Huh. That's good to know. Okay, so so what categories might we want to use? You could open it in a window, but I'm fine with leaving it just at the top of the page. Well, okay, let's create something and let's say you want students to read something. Okay, and then we'll save that. And let's say we want students to do some writing too. So we'll make it really simple. We'll put a new category of write. And we could probably put a colon in there or something. Well, should have done it for both. And now let's say you want to have them read, I don't know. Let's say you want them to read War and Peace just to keep them busy for a bit. You could just leave it like that. You could put in a due date for it, and then they'll get a little reminder that they should have read War and Peace by February 16th at 4:31 p.m. I'm not sure why that time popped up. And then if you want that due date to show up in the calendar, well, you can always put the due dates in, but if it's something like this where it's something external from the course where the date is not embedded in the item itself because they're reading a book either online or on paper. If you want it to display, you just click something like that, and that would be the first checklist item. Now that's without a quick link, because if the book is something separate that they bought and they're reading, or an ebook that isn't available in the course, you wouldn't really have a quick link for it. But if you want them to, for example, let's put in a new item here. Let's say we want them to read, let's say, well, I'll take an example, the study plan for module 4, let's say. And what I would do then is I would put in the study plan for module. And this is where things can be that problematic if you update the course. So you could just put a link to this by going here and going to quick links and then, well, inserting a quick link, and you would choose, in this case, the content, and the content would be in module 4. And you would just expand that. And again, the study plan is basically just the readings for this. And here we go, applications of supply and demand. And then, and again, you could make that display in the calendar, because this is an external tool. Well, because it's an external tool, I guess. Huh. Oh, because I didn't put in the due date. Okay, now it should display in the calendar. Okay, so because I don't think in this case, it will display in the calendar otherwise. But and so now I've put in 2 assignments for them to read this week. And this was module 15, I think I said, right? There we go. Okay. No. Oh, I must have used module 15 for another workshop. Okay, let's try this. This was module 16. I Oh, okay. It's the same idea in any case. These were ones they had created apparently with another workshop that just got rolled over. And they weren't visible to students because they weren't assigned. Okay.
So
So,
you created is down below 16.
yeah, I know. That's because, yeah, the one I actually just created was at the very end. And what I probably should do is delete some of these. So this is the one I just created. And you probably don't want 2 of the same names. And then if we want students to write something, you would put in, let's say, a new item of, and this is going to be assigned to the right category. And let's say, write or let's say, summary of War and Peace. There we go. And let's say provide a 50-word summary or whatever of War and Peace. Now that if that's an assignment, what you would do is if you wanted to put in the quick link again, you would go here. I actually don't have this as an assignment, but if we had insert quick link and it was an assignment, you would find it under assignments. If it was a checklist you wanted them to do, which you could admit a checklist, if it's a course file you uploaded, so there's a PDF or something you want to link to, you could do it through course files or through the content. You could give them a link to something external. You could grab something from the media library, something from OneDrive, quizzes, rubrics, self-assessments, or other things. So whatever it is that you want students to do, you can embed links to it as a quick link, but we're going to skip that since there is nothing corresponding to that. And then we can save that and we can display that in the calendar once we give them 5 minutes after they had to finish reading War and Peace to do this. So yeah, and for discussion board deadlines, it's really helpful. And one of the things I do when I use discussion boards is I give them in each discussion board 2 deadlines, one for the initial post and one for any follow-up post, because I want to make sure that other students have something to respond to. So if I have a week-long module, I might say 2 or 3 days into the week, I ask them, or 3 or 4 days, to provide their initial post and put in a link to that and just call it initial post in this discussion forum. And then the next one would be, reply to others or whatever, or complete your posts in the discussion forum. And then you can also have due dates for each of those, which gives them a reminder that this is something they were supposed to have done by that point. And you could put in descriptions and other things. And, again, if it's going to be something fairly similar in every module, you just copy it over and update the quick links. But again, you'll have to change all of those if you do have quick links too with due dates on them. Okay, so
John,
yes.
sorry, I want to jump in because I had been under the impression that categories were automatically sort of plugged into the grade book, but what you're saying.
These are different.
Yeah. So, but the value of this seems to be that you can highlight activities that are not graded. Like for example, sometimes I want students to do a draft that for which they won't be actually getting credit, and I've been creating like Google folders to do that. So, where will this? I mean, this will show up in these checklists, but that
It will show up in the checklist, and if you put in a due date for that, it will show up in their course calendar, and they'll get a reminder that these are the things that are due. And that's both within the course and also in the homepage, where the homepage now, which was something that was just added last semester, actually it got added because one of my students had come from another college, and there was a group of students who were looking at each other's Brightspace, and they noted that half of the people in this group had a list of all their due dates in all their courses, and the others only had it within each course. And I asked about that, and it turned out that there is a feature in Brightspace that we hadn't enabled, and we were able to get that turned on. So now students will see the due dates right when they log into Brightspace and also within each course. And again, they don't have to be graded items. They could be just reminders that this is what you should be doing, which is a sort of structure that can be helpful, just a little nudge to students to make sure they're making progress and not holding off until the end.
how do you create the web page or the homepage rather?
Well, that's automatically done. So they'll see that directly. So whenever you put in the due dates, even in the checklist, if it's not something that's graded within the course, that due date, if you put it in as a due date for that activity and you choose add to the calendar, it will show up in their course calendar.
And then John, if they don't do these activities, there's no value assigned to it, right?
Yeah, there doesn't have to be any point value assigned to it. However, you could use a checklist as a trigger or the completion of these things, even if it's not graded. If it's something they're submitting through Brightspace, you could send a reminder to students who have not yet completed that.
Okay, thank you.
And that's one of the next things we'll be showing. So let's say you created some of these checklists. So you saved one, and let's say we want to go in and add it somewhere. Let's say we want to add it to well, module 13. We'll put it in here, and I think it's under existing activities. Yes, checklist. So let's say we want to add the module 715 or 16 checklist, let's say. We would just click on this, and then it would pop up right at the bottom. And I usually drag the checklist right to the top so they get to see when they open the module what things are due and when they're due. And again, they can just check them off as they completed them, just as a way of giving them a reminder that, they should be keeping track of what needs to be done and what they've done and what is left to be done. So I'm not going to put it in here because, well, actually, yeah, I can put it in because it will say module 15 checklist, and it will pop up right at the bottom here. And now I'm going to get rid of it. But if you don't, again, what I normally would do is I would put it in and drag it up to the top, and then it's the first things that students will see when they, there we go. We'll get rid of the module 15 one because there is no module 15 in this course. Okay, so any questions on checklists?
Actually, it's not about checklist, John, but if I can ask, and I'm sorry if
Sure.
I'm dense, is there a way to configure Brightspace so that you can that you can tell Brightspace how often it will remind the students of things that are due and
Yes,
how many, like for example, analogy of Google Calendar, you can go into Google Calendar and alter the notifications and add
yes.
notifications. And is
And
there a way to do that in
And
Brightspace?
that's what we're going to be doing next. With intelligent agents, there are. Okay. And
Well,
that's the next
I
thing.
gave you that. I gave you that prompt. I gave you the segue.
So once again, we go to course tools and we go down here to course admin. And in course admin, what we want are intelligent agents, which are under communication, because you're communicating with students and reminding them of various things. And let's say we want to create, these are some things, well, this course I created a lot of these and I've been adding a few new ones each year, but basically let's start with one. We're going to create a new agent. And in fact, I'd encourage you just create if you don't have one, create your first agent. And a simple thing to do might be, let's say we want to create a login reminder. Let's say, and I probably have one of these already, and I don't want to have too many of them. So, um, and I'm just going to put 15. So I'll remember this. Okay. And here you could put the description is only for you. But so what you can choose is what categories, and it looks like I did duplicate a category. So this is going to be well, here again, these categories are only useful for you, but it's a way of grouping them. I'm only going to add one, which is call it login reminders. And we'll create that. Again, this is just for you to group things together. And now what happens is we're going to first say, how often do you want to check for whether people are logging in? And let's say you want students to log in at least once a week into your course. And so we could do this hourly. You probably don't want to set up agents to run hourly. That would, they'd probably start blocking them as spam. But you could do it daily, or you could, let's say we're going to do this weekly and just say repeat every 1 week, maybe. And you can pick the days. You could do it twice a week. You could do it 5 times a week with this. But you could do it on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, or Tuesday, Thursdays, or whatever. You can pick the time when you're going to do it, pick the start date, and let's say we're going to pick a date much further in the future. I don't want to accidentally leave this here and have it starting to do it. And picking an end date at the end of the semester. Let's say that's going to be sometime well, let me just say in May. I'll just put May there. There we go. Okay, so now you got a beginning and ending date, but we haven't checked for anything yet. The criteria would be for I would always suggest using all visibles and all users visible in the class list, and that's basically students. The different roles, or if you have TAs, if you have mentors or other things, you want all students to see it. Just click on all the users visible in the class list. Now, in terms of this, the two that are already specified, and then you have a lot of other ones you can define yourself, is login activity or course activity. And login activity is whether they've logged into Brightspace before during this period. Course activity would be whether they've logged into your course. Now, while it might be nice in general to have check to see whether they're logged into Brightspace, you're probably more interested in your course. And let's say we want to do this, since we're doing this weekly, let's say we're going to run this once a week and just send students a reminder that they haven't logged in the last week. And so that's the release condition. Now, we'll look at the others in a moment, but for now, that's all you need to do for this part. And then the question is, what happens when they do this? And here, you have the option of doing this every week and only doing it once, or if you're going to be checking every week to see whether they've logged in, we probably want to do that every time the agent runs. So the first is telling it how, well, we just told it it's going to do this every week. We don't only want to send that message out the first time they've disappeared for a week. We may want to do that every time they disappear for a week. So that's probably the best there. And then send an email when the criteria is satisfied. Now, here, what you have to do is you can't just put in a generic name. What you have to do is go over to this list. Oops. Well, you could do it for specific students, but that's not very useful. Here we go. The special email users you can use is the initiating user. Okay. And you can either remember that. I get so used to doing it, I just remember it. But if you click on the what special email address you can use, you could just copy that and paste it in. And this will be to whatever, that's basically just a variable that will automatically fill in the name of the student who has triggered this. And then you can choose to copy yourself on it, either as a carbon copy so they see that you're getting the notification, or as a blind carbon copy, and then you'll get it, but they won't see that you're also getting it. So, I will generally let them know that I'm getting it. So I'll put in my email address there. And then the subject. And here you could put whatever you want. So the subject, I usually just say login reminder. And now what's kind of really useful is these replace strings. Okay. And replace strings allow you to use a variable that will automatically be filled in with one of these tokens. And specifically, what I generally use for these things is the initiating user first name with caps on each of those. So I will just copy and paste that, or I'll just type it. But I will say hi, and then initiating user, first name, and then, maybe a comma or colon, and then see, I see that you haven't logged in the past 7 days. You may want to then remind them of, the importance of staying current, and also just saying, I'm concerned that, or you could say, I'm concerned that you haven't logged in, and I, just want to check on how you're doing and make sure you're okay and that you're making good progress in the course. If if something is interfering with your ability to participate, send me an email. I'm not going to type all that, but, put in something that is positive, but lets them know that you're concerned that they've disappeared. And then, or if you want attachments, you could upload them here, and then we can save and close. And well, there's one more thing we have to do. We can save that, but what we have to do, the one thing that, oh, I didn't pick the day. Okay, let's say we're going to do this every Friday, let's say. The other thing we have to do, and this is something that's really easy for people to forget, is once you set it all up, make sure you click agent is enabled. Because if you don't enable it, it will be sitting there, but it won't actually start running on the schedule. And so this is a new agent which was just added. And now what happens is, if you want to test it, where did that go? It's in here somewhere. Login reminder. Oh, login reminder 15. Now you notice it's scheduled to run on January 30th, but one of the options you have is to do a practice run. This is my fall class, and the practice, if you run now, it will run it ignoring the start date. But if you choose a practice run, it will show you who has not logged in, who is going to be identified for it. Hmm. Okay, and then what will happen is it will run this and it will tell you, once it runs, it will tell you how many people were identified, and and it will show who they were and so forth. And you could click on the number of users identified and, so forth. And now you notice there's generally a fair number of people who are identified, but these were all sent out a day or two before due dates for module quizzes or for assignments or other things. And it's just saying things like, this is just a reminder that we'll be discussing these things in class on Thursday. Please make sure you have not yet completed these things. Please complete them before we discuss them in class, etc. So we've just created the login reminder, and I'm going to delete mine. But well, it's still running, so maybe I shouldn't delete it yet. Let me edit it, and so at least it's not going to be active there. Because I don't want this running all through the spring, sending people in my fall class reminders that they have not been active. Okay, so now let's say you want to do something else. Let's look at all the categories of things you can do. And what are some things you might want a reminder about? Well, think about it and put in chat. But let's say I'm going to just create one. Let's say an exam 3 reminder. Well, let me say exam 33 reminder, so I'll know which one is here. And you can put this in a category. I think I have exam reminders. And I'm going to schedule this. Let's say for something like that, if there's an exam approaching and there's a due date on it, one of the things you could do is do a one-time run. And you could pick, let's say the exam is due on, February 5th. So I might send a reminder out on the morning of the 4th, let's say, and let's say 11:52. There we go. And what I want to do is, again, send it to all users visible in the class list, except now I'm going to look at the release conditions. And the release conditions have a whole series of options here. It could be whether they've watched a recorded lecture, although if you're looking at something like that is recorded, you can only tell whether they've checked the link for it, for example, or if they've opened the item. It won't necessarily say they watched it, but if you have some quiz questions embedded in the video, then and that gets assigned to the grade book, then you could check to see that. And you could have them whether they've submitted something to a folder, if you have a folder for them, a Dropbox for them to submit things, if they've received feedback from peers or from others, if there's a rubric, the score on the rubric, you can give them warnings if the scores are below a certain level, if they have not submitted when they were supposed to have submitted something. So this is, you praise them and thank them for submitting and then have it do something. Or if they haven't submitted, you could send them a reminder that they have not yet submitted and the due date is coming up. If you have certificates or awards, you can activate that. In fact, that's how we notified people about attendance award for workshops the last couple of years. Just automatically run that for anyone who received the award based on which award they received. You could even tie it to the checklist, whether they've completed the checklist. I generally don't do that. I encourage them to use it, but it's mostly for their own benefit. But if you're doing group enrollments, you could basically determine whether they've chosen a group or whether they haven't chosen a group, et cetera. You could, if you have learning objectives and competencies, you could tie it to that. It could be when the course is complete. That's how they award certificates in the SUNY courses, the SUNY CPD courses. Just visiting the content topics, which could tell you whether they've at least visited a link to watch a video, for example, visited all the content topics, those little things, the percent complete for each module. But again, it doesn't mean they've necessarily done anything. It just means they opened the link in some way. And this is a really useful thing to put in no posts on the topic, for example. So, you could say if they have not yet you could send a message to everyone who has not yet made their initial post or who has not made, reply posts or whatever. So let's say we want to do no post on the topic, and then we could pick a discussion forum. In this class, because it's an in-person class, I only have one discussion. But so let's say it's there, and then it could be, you could check whether they have no threads or no threads or replies or no replies. So if you could send a warning out if they have no threads posted. If they haven't started a thread, you could send a reminder out if they haven't posted any replies, or if they haven't done anything, you could send a reminder, and it's the same sort of thing. So that's one option. But I did say this was going to be for an exam. So let's go to a quiz grade, because it's showing up as a grade. So one option here is no grade received. So if you put no grade received and then you tie it to, say, this, I think I said exam 3, this would be a reminder that they have not yet completed a self-graded exam. Or you could send them a reminder when they did get a grade, if it's something you're grading slowly over the course of a few days, so they get a reminder saying, your grade has now been posted. And that's all automated, so you don't have to, do it you don't have to send out the reminders yourself. And then again, we'll create that condition. And then again, you would go through and you would send an email and write what that email should be. Does that make sense? Okay, so and for this one, you only want it to be the first time. Say you haven't completed this, and just say, please be sure to complete this by the due date, and then list the time. And again, if you want to, you could link directly to the item with a quick link, which makes it easier for people to find things. And I'm going to cancel this and not actually create that one, because it's easy to get lost in that long list. And again, you don't have to do all these, you could just create one or two or a few, maybe one a module. And then over time, if you're using a similar structure, you could just add more each year and, make sure all the links are correct and the dates and so forth. But it's a really nice way of just nudging students a little bit about things that are due. Or if you have a large class, and I do have some tied to grade scores on exams, if students are falling into a category where it looks like they might be failing, sending reminders that, they're struggling a bit right now and automating that, it will go out just to the students who are having trouble and, letting them know that you're there to help, giving them some suggestions on strategies, talk about perhaps visiting the tutoring office or whatever is relevant, for your specific course, and reminding them that they do, in this case, I send reminders that they do have multiple attempts allowed on all of these items, and to make sure that they use this, but only after they've mastered the material. They shouldn't be taking the test until they've mastered the earlier material and they're ready to complete the test and so forth. So that's pretty much all I've got here. Any questions? Students really appreciate it. And one thing I get is feedback every year that I've done this and in every course is that they really appreciate the checklist, just those little reminders of what's due in each module. They also generally really appreciate the reminders. There was one time when I forgot to put in a reminder about something, and I got lots of notes from students saying, "You didn't remind us this week." So I've generally been careful in making sure I don't miss them. And in each case, it was because I had created the agent, but I think it happened twice. I forgot to click the agent is enabled for a specific thing. Um, so that's it. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, well, I will stop the recording.